Hi everyone and welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial, as a follow-up to the last tutorial on configuring ASAv management IP address and enabling the password, in this tutorial, I'm going to share with you how to configure ASAv, the inside and outside interface, as well as dynamic pad so that you can allow the workstation in the inside or the internal LAN to go out to the public internet. So this is a very basic diagram that we will be configuring. So first, we will be configuring the outside interface of the ASAv, right? The WAN interface, and then we will proceed to configure the LAN interface, and then of course, we will set up a dynamic pad so that the workstation behind the firewall will be able to access the internet. Okay, now let's hop over to the ASAv. Okay, first, of course, you need to go into enable mode, then go into the global configuration. So the first thing we want to do is to go into the gigabit Ethernet 0/0 interface, which is going to be our outside interface. So let's type in the command 0/0. Let's give it a name, outside, right? You can set your creativity. So default, the outside interface is set to security level 0. So security level is between 0 to 100, 0 being the least secure zone, and then 100 being the most secure zone or interface, right? So by default, the outside interface is set to 0, which is the least secure. Next, let's do a no shutdown. Okay, so if I show interface IP brief, I should see that currently I have the status of gigabit Ethernet 0 up, right? But there is no IP address assigned yet. Okay, so what we need to do is to assign the IP address to the outside interface, which is also your gigabit Ethernet 0 interface, right? So in a lab environment, usually, we have or home environment, we have a ISP that provides a DHCP IP address to your WAN router, or in this case, the firewall. So in a lab environment or home environment, the command to allow the ASA outside interface to get IP address from your upstream ISP provider, but or in my case, I'm using a two-tier firewall, so ASAv is behind my first tier firewall. We can issue this command, right? Make sure that you're inside the interface, which is denoted by the config dash if, right? So that shows you that you're inside the interface. So what we're going to do is to give it an IP address, IP address. Now, in a normal situation, you key in the full IP address and the subnet, but for this case, when we are getting a DHCP IP from the upstream router or service provider, we will use DHCP. Now, if you're not too sure what other commands are available, press a question mark. Now, if you enter IP address DHCP without a set route, right, which is needed to define the default route based on the DHCP server, it will just turn on the DHCP client, right? So do take note of that. So you need to issue the command set route. Okay, this will then allow the outside interface to get the IP address from the upstream DHCP server and at the same time, it will set a default route to the default gateway from the DHCP server itself. Okay, so once that is done, usually you will do a no shutdown if you have not done it to bring up the interface. Okay, now if we do a show config, show running config, we will see that I have configured my gigabit Ethernet interface to have name outside security 0. I've set the IP address DHCP set route, right? So this will allow my gigabit Ethernet 0 interface to get the IP address from the upstream DHCP server. Okay, so now if I show interface IP brief, I should see that now I've gotten the IP address from my DHCP server on the upstream side. And you can see that the method is DHCP. Okay, now if I do a show route, or is it route show? Right, I can see that my default gateway, in this case on my upstream firewall, is 192.168.23.88, right, which is my firewall facing the internet. Actually, it's not, right? I have actually a 3 tier. So, but anyway, that's not important. But this is where you will see the default gateway is being set automatically. Okay, so once we've configured the outside interface, let's move on to configure the inside interface. First, let's exit out of the interface itself, or you can actually issue the command for the interface gigabit 0/1. It will bring you to the other interface. But as a good practice, when you're starting out, it helps you to get familiarized with the environment. So now let's go over to the inside interface, which is our gigabit Ethernet 0/1. Okay, once you're inside, same thing. Let's give it a name if inside. Okay, by default, when you set the name to inside, you will see that the security level for inside is set to 100 by default, right? So this will be your secured interface or the secured zone. So any traffic that is going from a secured zone to a less secured zone is allowed by default, and any interface with a less secure interface or zone to a higher secure interface or zone, that is where you will need to configure the firewall rules to allow traffic to pass through the interface or the firewall itself. Okay, next what we'll do is to manually set the IP address, right? So IP address 192.168.46.221. Okay, ignore the license because I've not activated the license yet. I have another article written up. You can refer to that in my website if you want to. But let's carry on configuring the IP address, which is 192.168.46.221. So this is my inside interface IP address, subnet mask 255.255.0, which is /24, right? Enter, and then do a no shut if you have not bring up the interface yet. Okay, now if I do a show run again, we can see that for my inside interface, I have configured the IP address as defined over here. Okay, so that's pretty much how you configure the inside and the outside interface of the ASAv firewall. Now if I show IP interface, show interface, IP brief, you will see that now I have configured the outside interface, right? As well as the inside interface. Okay. So now let's hop over to the client that I have prepared previously. Okay, so you can see I have a whole setup, IP config. Let's look at the IP config and see that my client is 250 and then my default gateway is 221, which is the interface of the ASAv. Now, if I do a ping 192.168.46.221, I will be able to ping my inside interface. I have not really configured ICMP properly, so I won't be able to ping the outside, and because the pet rule is not there, I won't be able to ping the outside interface. So to just validate, we can just open a browser, and then let's try and go to google.com. You should see that the connection is blocked in this case, and you won't be able to reach the internet. Now, the command to configure net is very straightforward for a lab environment when we are doing a dynamic pad, right? Which is the sort of a port address translation. We are translating the inside IP address to the outside IP address using port that is being assigned, because we don't have a range of IP address, especially in lab environment. To do that, what we are do is let's exit out of my interface. First, what we need to do is to create the object called my inside net, right? So what it does is it creates an object group called, oops, sorry, uh, object network. So we're going to create a network object, right? You can see, and then we're going to specify this network object has a subnet of 192.168.46.0. 255.255.255.0. So these are, I think, with the newer firewalls, next gen firewall, UTM, etc. A lot of the products out there are looking at using objects, which allows easier management from the GUI interface, right? Which is our ASDM for the ASAv case. Okay, so let's set the subnet. So once it's done, right, we can configure the net statement in many parts of the ASAv configuration. But for simplicity's sake, what we can do is to create a net rule right in the network object itself by issuing the command net. You can do a question mark to check out, right? So you will need to use a open parenthesis, right? And then specify the inside, comma, the outside, right? So traffic coming from inside going to outside, you want to have a dynamic, right? And let's see what else is there. We can do source, right? If you are doing net configuration, there are a few more parameters you need to specify, but for dynamic pad it's really straightforward. And you can see you can either do a dynamic pad to a IP address, or a dynamic net to a range of IP address, or in our case very easily setting the interface, right? So default, it will take the outside interface as or the IP address assigned to the outside interface as the pad address, right? Which is your inside address will map to this pad address when it is going to the external internet. You can look at the ASAv official documentation. There are a lot more examples there on how to configure net, dynamic pad, dynamic net, static net, right? So, but in our tutorial, it's really straightforward. Once you've done this, then you are able to serve the internet. At the same time, with a bit more configuration on the domain, you will be able to register your smart license. Okay, so once we have this issue, okay, that's all for this tutorial in terms of configuring the outside interface, the inside interface, and configuring a dynamic pad. Now, if we go back to the client that we have previously configured, if I do a google.com, you can see that straight away I am now able to access the internet. Okay, so that's all for this short tutorial. So do stay safe, Take care of yourself and stay tuned for the next tutorial. Thank you and goodbye.